Hello, everybody.
Hi, hello.
Um, Today, the talk is titled Rejoicing in Our Present Perfection. A few weeks ago, the Bible lesson included the account of Daniel in the lion's den. I was reminded of the paintings by Britton Riviere that showed two scenes. So in the first painting, what you all can see, the viewer looking from behind Daniel sees Daniel standing before a group of lions. You'll notice his hands are bound behind his back. Also, each lion has a different look on its face. There's light coming from an opening behind Daniel as though the night had passed and the morning had arrived. A few things struck me as I viewed the painting. I noticed that even though I'm sure Daniel had spent the entire night awake, praying fervently, his form is erect. He isn't worn out and all hunched over from a long night, and he isn't off cowering in a corner. He isn't even able to ward off the lions himself since his hands are bound. But still, he looks confident in the harmonious government of God that is intact. There's a second painting. There you go. The second painting is entitled Daniel's Answer to the King, and it shows Daniel with his focus turned from the lions to the light, to his king. You'll notice that the lions haven't gone anywhere and that Daniel's hands are still bound behind his back. But their presence and activity no longer have his attention. We too can turn from the roar of mortal mind to our King, God. There's no need to look back. We face the light of truth and go forward, just as God told Moses that the children of Israel should do when they reach the Red Sea. Remember how the account goes? Quote, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward." These paintings have been a source of inspiration to me for the past few weeks. No matter how loudly mortal mind would like to roar about how long a problem has been going on, or how loudly it would roar about why a particular problem is too hard to heal through prayer, we can stand confidently on the rock of truth, silence the material senses, turn to our King, God, and go forward. We don't even need to turn back to see if the lions are still there. They will fade as we move toward the light. Soon, we couldn't see them if we tried, nor could we hear their roar. It is silenced. In our textbook, Eddie tells us the foundation of mortal discord is a false sense of man's origin. When I read that passage, I picture a pile of children's building blocks. The bottom block is labeled matter exists. The next is there is no substance in matter. Then we're born into matter. And eventually I reach a top block that is labeled by whatever lion is roaring the loudest at that time, such as hurt finger or pain when moving or diagnosed with disease X. When we begin to pray, where do we start? If we pray about fixing the hurt finger or pain when moving, or disease X, our efforts would be focused only on the block at the top of the stack. However, what happens when we focus our prayers on the foundational block that suggests man's origin is based on substance matter and remove that block? Yep, the whole stack comes tumbling down. As our leader states, man is not matter. He's not made up of brain, blood, bones, and other material elements. I like to think of the term man as shorthand for the full manifestation of God. Therefore, God's manifestation cannot suffer from a problem based on brain, blood, bones, or other material elements. Is this so hard to believe or accept? If we're told we had a disease in our feathers, or wings, or beaks, we would quickly dismiss the diagnosis by stating that we don't have any feathers, or wings, or beaks. We can be just as quick to dismiss any claim built on the false foundation of our origin being in matter. Let me quote from an address entitled "Immortality Brought to Light" by Dorothy Reiki. Quote, I ask myself the following questions daily. I'm going to request that you answer them. Answer them just as you would if you were on the witness stand and required to tell the truth. When did you enter Russia? How long have you lived under Russian rules and regulations? How many injustices and indignities have you suffered in Russia? What taxes and additional penalties have you had to pay in Russia? How many unhappy, discouraged, fearful days have you experienced in Russia? When are you going to take a train out of Russia? Isn't it clear that because you never entered Russia, you could not have suffered there, nor could you leave a place in which you've never been? Now let us answer some more questions with the same positive approach, with the same scientific certainty. When did you enter the kingdom of matter? Or in other words, when were you born? How long have you lived under material rules or regulations? How often have you sinned in matter? How many aches and pains have you suffered in matter? How many unhappy, discouraged, fearful days have you spent in the state of matter? When are you going to take a train, so to speak, and pass on or die out of matter? When are you going to take an airplane, so to speak, and ascend out of matter? Thus, is it not understandable that because none of you ever lived in matter, you cannot sin or suffer in it? You cannot worry, fret, or stew in it. You cannot die out of it, nor can you ascend out of something into which you never descended. End quote. By removing from thought the false foundation of the reality of matter, we have eliminated the possibility of experiencing any material problem. Realizing, affirming, rejoicing in the forever fact that God's manifestation is eternal, never born, and therefore never dying, there is no material in between in which to experience the pains or pleasures of the flesh. We're all familiar with the two accounts of creation related in the book of Genesis. In the first is a description of the spiritual true, only creation. The second describes an untrue version of creation in and of matter, of man created from the dust, as woman created from man, and then of a union of a man and woman creating other men and women. This second account of creation is also where naming or labeling occurs. Quote, out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. End quote. When I hear a fancy name for a problem, a big red flag goes up because names are part of the second account of creation, which is false. For example, when my youngest brother-in-law was in high school, he wasn't feeling well, and his mother took him to the family doctor. He was diagnosed with mononucleosis, hepatitis, and possibly cancer. The doctor advised his mother to monitor him for 3 weeks and then return. She asked me to pray. As I recall, I sat at my desk and wondered how prayer was going to heal these diseases with those long, multisyllabic names. I didn't even know what one of them was. All I knew was that the names were scary. They conjured up mental pictures that were frightening and prognoses that were terrifying. Then the mental light bulb turned on. The thought came, what if he had been diagnosed with the purple spot and green line disease? Well, I realized that was silly. There was no such thing as a purple spot and green line disease. Strictly speaking, there wasn't a disease called mono or hepatitis or cancer. Naming is all part of the counterfeit view of creation and is false. Nothing. Doesn't Eddie tell us the nothingness of nothing is plain? After 3 weeks, he went back to the doctor. Not only was he completely free of the labels the doctor had named, but has remained free of any symptoms in the decades since. Note, the name God gave everything in the true account of creation was good. I attended a talk by Lawrence Doyle at Arden Wood. After he finished his talk, he opened the meeting up for questions, which the audience submitted on 3x5 note cards. One of the cards quoted our textbook about getting the name of the disease. Quote, to heal by argument, find the type of the ailment, get its name, and array your mental plea against the physical. End quote. After reading the question aloud, Lawrence paused, looked up at the audience, and asked, isn't the name always nothing? Yes, the name is always nothing. What are some other names built on the false foundation of the suggestion that matter is real? What about the name old age? Just like the names of the issues with my brother-in-law, the name old age brings along with it a sense of fear, of dread, that problems are inevitable and are often incurable. Let's get out our wrecking ball of prayer and knock down the whole stack. Old age is a term that promotes a fear of incurable conditions. But because matter is neither real nor substantial, Nothing can be born into matter, and therefore there is no matter to age. We see the false foundation, the root of the problem, comes down to the suggestion that matter is real and there can be a material birth. This false foundational block is knocked out by the forever fact, quote, divine science rolls back the clouds of error with the light of truth and lifts the curtain on man as never born and as never dying, but as coexistent with his creator, end quote. And he also states, man in science is neither young nor old. So the manifestation of God is neither young nor old. Then what is being labeled as old? The counterfeit view of creation, which is not us, is not real, is not anything. Let us address through prayer some of the common claims of old age. First, sight. We know a pair of prescription glasses lying on a table has no ability to see. Would an eyeball on a table do any better? Who or what tells us that eyeballs can see if they are attached in a certain way to a material body? Mortal mind. Eyeballs have only the power that mortal mind suggests they have. On page 587 of our textbook, part of the definition of God is that God is all-seeing. Therefore, the only seeing going on is God. We don't see, we are what God sees. So we can't lose our ability to see, since that capability is only and always with God. In a testimony printed in the May 1st, 2006 Christian Science Sentinel, the author, a resident in a retirement community, describes a condition in one eye that was given two names: cataract and drooping eyelid. It was recommended that he have surgeries for both conditions. He states, blindness suggests that our vision of divine goodness can be taken away. But I knew this couldn't be true. I could trust in divine love to heal me. Problems with eyesight are often associated with aging, and I felt it was important to affirm that I wasn't an aging mortal whose faculties were running down. He then quoted from the account in our textbook of the actor who hobbled to the theater, but was able to easily move around the stage once his cue was spoken. The author concluded, so even though conditions such as blindness appear to be physical, they actually have a mental cause. And I prayed to know that I wasn't subject to material conditions such as aging or to any other mistaken belief about my identity as God's child. Right now, I affirmed, I am the perfect and complete child of God. A day or two after I had prayed this way, I awoke early and looked at the clock as I usually did, even though I couldn't read it without glasses. But this particular morning, I could see it very clearly. He goes on to say that his vision was tested for a driver's license, and one eye was 20/20 and the other was almost the same. He also didn't need reading glasses anymore. We also get a lot of noise from the lions of materialism that one's hearing can deteriorate with old age. Mortal mind would suggest that there are quite a few pieces and parts in a material ear, and that eventually these pieces and parts don't work correctly anymore, and hearing can be lost. Does God require pieces and parts of matter to be heard? Nope. And here is proof. In a testimony from the March 1918 issue of the Christian Science Journal, a woman tells us, for 3 or 4 years, I had been an invalid, having had several operations. In the last operation, it had seemed necessary to remove from my left ear the eardrum and ear bones. And as we are supposed to hear by means of these parts, I was deaf in that ear. After reading Science and Health one sentence at a time for about 20 minutes, she realized there was no room for any discord. Troubles with her eyes, nerves, and lungs were immediately healed. She continues, I did not think of my ears right then, only I knew there was no aching. But that night, when trying to find out whether or not my watch had stopped, I inadvertently held it to the left instead of to the right ear. I had never heard distinctly with my left ear, and how great was my surprise when, for the first time in my life, I heard the tick of my watch with that ear, with which I was never supposed to hear again. The eardrum is gone. The hole left by taking out the ear bone is still there. But God does not need these material conditions to make his child perfect. How quickly and completely those lions were silenced. Turning back to see how matter was coming along wouldn't have helped. The healing resulted by turning completely away from what the material senses were reporting. Another roaring lion is that our mental capacity can deteriorate. This lie is based on the belief that matter exists, has substance, we were born into it, and therefore are subject to its so-called laws and regulations, and that our intelligence is from a brain. In our textbook, we read, every concept which seems to begin with the brain begins falsely. And on page 426, we read, man is immortal, and the body cannot die because matter has no life to surrender. We can be specific in addressing this claim of mental incapacity by rephrasing that statement as, man is immortal, and the brain cannot become less intelligent because it has no intelligence to surrender. An article from the February 17th, 2003 Christian Science Sentinel gives pointers on how to silence the roar of mental decline. Quote, sometime in the late 1980s, I became aware of peculiar memory problems beyond just occasionally forgetting a name or mislaying something. In 1991, I sought help from a memory research group. They gave me the chilling diagnosis of early senile dementia, end quote. After learning of Christian Science from someone else in her Alzheimer's group, she visited a reading room and then talked with several practitioners. After one particular visit, she writes, quote, I saw that God truly is love. I saw the stars and planets, the universe in vast and peaceful order, moving in love. I knew I was part of it. I knew that everyone who has ever lived is and always will be living in this love. And because he gives such pure love and never sends evil, but holds his creation forever safe, I was able to love God fully, ardently, for the first time in my life. Over the next weeks, life continued much as usual. I took no further medication. I did not drop off the precipice into dementia. I attended my weekly Alzheimer's support group. I noticed that I was aware of which members were missing, and I remembered things from the previous meetings. Once, when one of our group leaders was searching for the right word to make a point, I supplied the word. I noticed the two leaders glance at each other in surprise, and I was surprised myself. The following week, the group leaders asked if I would mind being reevaluated. I agreed, and I felt I would do well. On March 30th, 2 months after my visit with the first Christian Science practitioner, I met with a doctor at New York Presbyterian Hospital. He gave me a series of tests similar to ones I'd taken over the last few years. Tests I'd sometimes found so frustrating that I cried over my inabilities. This time, I breezed through them, enjoying the challenge. End quote. The diagnosis of Alzheimer's was reversed. Another block that can be placed on the top of the stack is that people become less mobile as part of old age. It seems like it is almost expected that some sort of aid will be needed to get around safely, and that our posture may become less erect. I heard this account from a friend who used to attend a Christian Science church in New York City. As I recall, the auditorium had a seating area way up in a balcony, and a new usher, still active in his working career, was being shown around by a man who had been a member of the church for many years and had been retired from work for quite some time. After walking up the stairs to the balcony, the new member was huffing and puffing, yet the retired gentleman was not out of breath at all. The new member asked how that was possible. Smiling, the retired man said, "Oh, don't worry. I had trouble climbing the stairs when I was your age." Since God's manifestation isn't made up of brain, blood, bones, and other material elements, such as lungs or muscles, we cannot experience any limitations from lungs or muscles. Other blocks that mortal mind would like to add to the stack involve appearance and can be labeled, for example, gray hair or wrinkles. Let's review the account in our textbook of the woman who didn't age because she had taken no notice of passing time. Quote, "Disappointed in love in her early years, she became insane and lost all account of time. Believing that she was still living in the same hour which parted her from her lover, taking no note of years, she stood daily before the window watching for her lover's coming. In this mental state, she remained young. Having no consciousness of time, She literally grew no older. Some American travelers saw her when she was 74 and supposed her to be a young woman. She had no care-lined face, no wrinkles nor gray hair, but youth sat gently on cheek and brow. Asked to guess her age, those unacquainted with her history conjecture that she must be under 20. Years had not made her old because she had taken no cognizance of passing time, nor thought of herself as growing old. The bodily results of her belief that she was young manifested the influence of such a belief. She could not age while believing herself young, for the mental state governed the physical. Impossibilities never occur. The primary of that illustration makes it plain that decrepitude is not according to law, nor is it a necessity of nature, but an illusion. End quote. Another term we hear is to grow old. Now let's just stop and think about that term. When looking at a plant, when it grows, what does it grow? Does it grow old, dried up, wrinkled leaves? No, it grows lovely, fresh foliage. So the term growing old is actually an oxymoron. Combining the earlier metaphor of building blocks with the concept of plants, we find this in our textbook. Divine science lays the axe at the root of the illusion that life or mind is formed by or is in the material body. And science will eventually destroy this illusion through the self-destruction of all error and the beatified understanding of the science of life. Isn't this what Jesus showed when he came across a fig tree that should have had fruit but didn't? We read in the book of Matthew, and when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it and found nothing thereon but leaves only, and said unto it, let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. To me, this shows that unproductive growth doesn't last, but withers away in the light of truth. I think Eddie silences the entire roar of materialism with regard to old age with this passage from our textbook. Life is eternal. We should find this out and begin the demonstration thereof. Life and goodness are immortal. Let us then shape our views of existence into loveliness, freshness, and continuity, rather than into age and blight. Several years ago, I took up the practice of reading through both the Bible and Science and Health each year. It works out to about 2 pages a day to finish Science and Health, and about 5 pages a day to finish the Bible. There are daily Bibles that are arranged with readings for each day of the year, and the daily passages include selections from the Old Testament, the New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs, which makes it much easier to read the book of Leviticus. There are also Bibles arranged in chronological order, which makes for a very interesting read. For each of the past 4 years, I've chosen a different translation. One thing I noticed by reading it through is how in the New Testament we find Jesus going up to a mountain to pray and then coming down to be with the disciples and the people, up to the mountain to pray, and down to be with the people, up and down, up and down. It isn't just a physical transition, is it? We could say his thought was up while privately communing with God, and then he brought that inspiration with him as he went about his day. A few weeks ago, my Bible readings for the day included this account from John. Jesus came again into Cana of Galilee, where he made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus was come out of Judea into Galilee, he went unto him and besought him that he would come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. The nobleman saith unto him, Sir, come down ere my child die. Jesus saith unto him, Go thy way, thy son liveth. And the man believed the word that Jesus had spoken unto him, and he went his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, Thy son liveth. What struck me was Jesus' refusal to come down to a human material concept of creation. As Eddie states, Jesus stooped not to human consciousness, nor to the evidence of the senses. He did not see or accept as real the suggestion of substance matter, of sick matter, or of dying matter. Instead, Jesus stated the eternal fact that the man's son could only express life. God, thy son liveth. This light of the Christ illumined the Father's thought, thus bringing the man up to see as God sees. Then the man took this correct view with him and he went home. Then I thought about Christian Science nurses. Before coming to work, before entering a room, the thought of the nurse is up on the mountaintop. This view may be challenged by the roar of material sense, but the nurse refuses to come down and accept that view as real, refuses to evaluate and analyze what the lion looks like, smells like, sounds like, or feels like. And instead, like Daniel in the second painting, keeps thought up at the light, at our King, our God, at the true view. They maintain their position of spiritual altitude, their mountaintop view, the God's eye view. This idea is summarized in our textbook by lifting thought above error or disease and contending persistently for truth. You destroy error. I'll read an excerpt from a Sentinel article in the first anthology that ties all these points together. Quote, a number of years ago, a Christian Science practitioner had as a patient a Civil War veteran who was suffering from a wound received in the war. The case not yielding to treatment, Mrs. Eddy was asked what she thought the error could be that prevented the healing. She replied, in effect, that the practitioner, as well as the patient, believed there had once been a war and regarded it as a link in the man's history. In this example, the false foundational blocks are labeled or named, Matter exists, there's substance in matter, we're born into matter, followed by there was a civil war, and there was an injury from that war. By heeding Eddie's counsel, the practitioner and patient realized there never was a civil war, and thereby could refuse to come down to the view being presented by mortal mind. This correct view resulted in healing. One more idea that I've found helpful and would like to share is this passage from Isaiah. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is none else. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. The words that caught my attention were declaring the end from the beginning. We know to start our treatment with perfect God and perfect man as the basis of thought and demonstration. But now Isaiah is reminding us to also declare the end from what appears as the beginning of a problem. And what is the end? The outcome. We know truth is always the victor. Therefore, when we start with perfection and we end with perfection, what happens in between? There's no room for fear or doubt or discouragement, is there? For example, I enjoy watching football on TV. Often my husband records games so we can replay it later and whiz through the commercials. Sometimes, though, I peek online and find out the final score before we have finished watching the game. As the game nears the end, there might be only 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and my team is down by 2 touchdowns. But I'm not concerned. I'm not worried. I have no doubts. I know the outcome and can calmly sit back and watch the end of the game confidently. The same is true with our healing work. We know the beginning and we know the end. Perfect God and perfect man, period. When the belief of a power or substance apart from God is exposed as a lie, an error, as nothing real, we say we've had a healing. Of course, we know the change in our experience is a result of a change in thought. We realize there never was a mind separate from the divine mind that could believe there was some matter that needed to be fixed. When relating a healing experience during our Wednesday testimony meetings, a man at my church likes to add the words, as expected. It turns out this declaration, as expected, originated with one of his employees. As the team was faced with complex problems to solve, the church member would pray. The employee started noticing how quickly solutions to difficult engineering problems were found once the manager had been informed, and started saying, as expected. My church friend realized this is a perfect response to healing, as expected. As Eddie says, truth is always the victor. Lyman Powell, in his biography of Mrs. Eddy, records an occasion on June 13, 1888, where our leader attended the National Christian Science Association in Chicago as a guest. After she was seated, it was announced that she would give the main address. Without missing a beat, She spoke extemporaneously on the 91st Psalm. The substance of this sermon is found in miscellaneous writings. On the way out of the music hall, a reporter called out to her, "Mrs. Eddy, what is your definition of treatment?" She paused a moment and replied, "Treatment is the absolute acknowledgement of the ever-presence of infinite perfection," which he recorded and put in a Chicago newspaper as part of his article covering the event. Let me say that again in case you're not familiar with that definition. Treatment is the absolute acknowledgement of the ever-presence of infinite perfection. There are no roaring lions, only light. There's no false foundation or stack of problems, just the true, harmonious, intact view of spiritual creation. There is no in between of fear or doubt, just perfect God and perfect man, always. Strictly speaking, there is not a person who is a patient that needs to be treated. The only patient is the belief of life, truth, intelligence, or substance in matter. God's manifestation doesn't need to be treated. God's manifestation doesn't need to be improved. In fact, God's man can't be improved. One of my favorite passages from the textbook is, "Warring no more over the corporeality, but rejoicing in the affluence of our God." In other words, we must stop coming down to look at the presentation by mortal mind and stay up and rejoice in the abundant goodness of God. I'll close with this passage from the first edition of Science and Health. If we have the understanding of our God being, or the omnipotence of truth, we should have no fear of matter, and having none, our bodies would become harmonious and immortal. A belief of substance matter would then give place to the understanding of substance spirit. For the spiritual body is the only real one, and tangible as the material. Amen.